Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our next session for the Longevity Leaders World Congress, titled, What is the Longevity Dividend and What are the Opportunities for Investors? As you have been doing all day, please do keep your questions coming in for the panel as we go through the session. You'll see the live discussion box in the bottom right of your screen. Please do ask your questions in there and we'll get to as many of them as possible throughout the course of the discussion here. I hope you're enjoying the content across the three streams today, and also have an opportunity to explore the rest of the website, the company showcases and poster presentations, and really getting involved. But for now, delighted to be bringing together a fantastic lineup of investors in the space to talk about the longevity dividends. And for now, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for this discussion, Jonathan Synett, Managing Director with NCL Technology Ventures. So Jonathan, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Josh. Welcome everybody to this panel. I'm Jonathan Synett. I'm Chief Investment Officer at NCL Technology Ventures. We're an early stage healthcare and life science fund, investing in businesses across the UK and Europe at seed and Series A stage, with a specific interest in the longevity space. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of investors from across Europe and the US, who all have experience and interest in investing in the longevity space. And we'll be discussing what exactly we mean when we refer to the longevity dividend, where we see opportunities as investors for making investments, and therefore what we think some of the opportunities might be for entrepreneurs out there. I'm going to ask each panel member to introduce themselves one by one. So I'm going to start with Anula.
Hello, everybody. I'm speaking to you from California, where there's a lot of interest in longevity, as I think you might have heard in Silicon Valley. My fund, EXXClaim Capital, comes at the problem from a slightly different angle, and that is the difference between men and women. EXXClaim is focused on women's health, and I think this is relevant for longevity and well-being in two ways. One is women live longer than men, and yet their quality of life later on in life is worse than men's. So that is relevant to longevity and well-being. The second is there's increasing evidence that the biology of men and women is quite different, and that is divergent in longevity and aging processes as well. So I'm coming at it from the angle of making sure that we are looking at all of the population and taking into account these differences and identifying opportunities that augment the general discussion in longevity. I invest in early stage companies and am very interested in innovations that again emphasize the differences between men and women.
Thanks very much. And Petr?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm managing partner of Longevitytech.fund, early stage startups focused fund, and as per name, we are right in the longevity field, which we understand as a broader definition, meaning that we invest in diagnostics, of course, the biotechnology, information platforms, and other enabling technologies like the assistance or the technologies which could leverage all of these trends like demographic aging and increased healthcare costs and so on. As I mentioned, we are focused on early stage. It means that we invest in pre-seed, seed, and maybe some small A round, but our standard ticket is 200K. And we already invested in 15 companies, mostly in US, UK, and partially in Europe. And we want to invest in another approximately 20 companies till the next year. So that's the basic description.
Great, thank you very much. And Flavia?
Thank you, Jonathan. I am a vice president in early stage practice. I lead on the life sciences and healthcare portfolio for Silicon Valley Bank. We work with companies in this space, especially coming out of spinning out top research from leading universities and companies between kind of seed and Series A and B. As an organization, we provide companies with quite a lot of supports and services from very early stage all the way into the sort of IPO through SVB Leerink, our investment bank specialized in life sciences. So we're at the core of the ecosystem. I think that my interest and what I'm seeing a lot more is this sort of personalized medicine space, regenerative medicine, and quite a lot that is being done in longevity in digital health. And hopefully today I'll be able to share some of those findings in EMEA. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks Flavia. And Joachim.
Yeah, I'm managing partner of a venture capital firm based in Berlin. So I'm speaking to you from Berlin. We are a classical venture capital investor in the healthcare space. We've done everything from biotechnology projects in oncology, gene therapy, and medical devices in metabolic diseases up to digital health and monitoring of chronic diseases. So we are entering the space from different angles, and we are very interested in the longevity space because all of healthcare is moving more and more into prevention and preventing age-related diseases. Also, these metabolic diseases that we are targeting is one of our foci by monitoring and also by drug development. They might be accessible in an early stage by targeting the mechanisms of aging. So therefore, we are looking very closely in the space and are currently looking for the right opportunities that we can target, but I think we talk about these opportunities later down the road, which opportunities are targeted for which types of investors at this point in time.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Thanks very much. And if I just can remind anybody, if you have any questions that you'd like to put to the panel during the discussion, then please put them in the chat and we'll try to pick up as many of them as possible. So Joachim, just staying with you for a second. So we talk a lot about the concept of the longevity dividend, and it's an incredibly broad space, really, thinking about longevity and all the different facets of it. What does the term mean to you as an investor, and how is it distinct from healthcare generally?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a difficult one. So the longevity dividend, I think that's something we all have to contend with in the next 10 to 20 years, because we are all talking constantly about that silver tsunami, about our aging society and how can we cope with that and all the associated pressures on the healthcare system that we are all facing. And therefore, the whole field is moving more and more to prevention. And I think if you look at the statistics, and that's also one of the big topics of the conference with these hallmarks of aging, all age-related diseases, which are basically all major diseases from cardiovascular, metabolic diseases, cancer, they all rise exponentially with the age. So therefore, if you can alleviate these chronic diseases by monitoring, better diagnostic, and in the long run, even addressing these mechanisms of these age-related diseases early on, also targeting the hallmarks of aging, I think there's a huge opportunity in that, because aging is a process with a 100% incidence in the population. Therefore, it's a huge investment opportunity. And the question is just for investors at this point in time, what's the risk-benefit ratio? So which projects are right for investing right at this moment in time? And it's all about risk taking. And therefore, you have currently different investors in the space. On the one side, the classical VC investors, who are a little bit risk averse, I would say. So they would be more targeting the preventative aspects like digital health, health monitoring, diagnostics, and shy away a little bit from directly interfering in the aging process in these 9 hallmarks of aging. But we have a lot of specialized longevity funds currently that are going into this space. But I would say these are more like mission-driven investors. the return on investment is not so much the focus as the mission to target this specific problem. But I think as we progress with these different projects along the line, more and more of the classical investors will also move in that space once you have more clinical evidence on different topics. So for now, we are basically on the reversing aging aspect, more on the sidelines, but more on the healthy aging aspect. So how can we bring people to the point in the next 10, 15 years where they can really benefit from these? Sergey Young yesterday in his keynote gave 3 different stages, like in Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3. And I think we are currently investing in the fields or looking for opportunities that can bring people in the Horizon 3. So we are basically investing in Horizon 1 or Horizon 2 projects, which is basically helping people stay healthy longer so they can really bridge that gap.
Lovely, thanks. Would anyone else on the panel would like to come in on that point?
I would echo what Joachim said, because I see people here in Silicon Valley, in particular, many very enormously wealthy tech entrepreneurs taking a very futuristic view, where they don't need to be that concerned about returns. It's mostly their own money, and they want to reverse aging. They want to do very fundamental differences. And I, again, echo Joachim, because in our fund, we are looking at what they might consider much more incremental changes, but much more achievable in the near term, and therefore better suited when you're funded by other people's money and you need to provide them returns. So I think the time horizons that Sergey put out yesterday are very relevant. And then the types of investors, the limited partners in the funds, have different expectations. So I think and that is all reflected in each of our investing focuses.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Peter, I was just going to come to you on this point.
Right. So maybe I would like to point that receiving the longevity dividend is a kind of an aggregated effect of many actions we need to do. So it could range from this disruptive research, like you mentioned, the billionaires are funding this kind of a research, but this is not enough, because then we need the second part, which is the commercialization part, because if you just develop something and there will be no commercial ecosystem or let's say the marketplace for that, so it will not survive, or it will get some deformations in the market. But at the same time, we need to build awareness within the population, not just to adopt these technologies or approaches, but in the same way to clearly distinguish between what is the right approach and what is the wrong approach, because all of this aging-related stuff is a kind of a potential explosion of the interest of the general public, and it could be like a really misleading to enter this very complex information space and different information. So what we see right now is a really very unstable space of information. What works, what not works, what will be available this year, next year, or after 10 years, nobody knows. But this is a mess. So if we want to develop a real ecosystem and information awareness within the population and receive the longevity dividend at some point in 5-10 years, so we need to systematically build all the parts of this ecosystem and movement, and that's of course the opportunity for investors and entrepreneurs.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Flavia, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of lean into this conversation, because I think when we're speaking about the longevity dividend, we're speaking about quite a number of waves of innovation that are coming to address this space. So I don't think it's about kind of waiting 10, 20 years to see the dividend. I think there are technologies and organizations right now that have started to commercialize. They're in the marketplace, and we can see those kind of incremental gains and maybe the first dividend for investing in this in the next couple of years. I'm just looking at Europe, and their last year there have been about 54 investments in the space, which gives me a lot of confidence that we're approaching a point where we're starting to identify those organizations that can go and meet the sort of fund life cycle, can meet the LP expectations, and we might see a lot more results than we expect. Of course, that might not necessarily apply to new therapies, new drugs, that from a regulatory perspective, we might just have to wait for a much longer cycle.
Yeah, and Flavia, just building on that in terms of the increasing investor appetite, let's say, and I've heard a lot already in this panel about the different types of investors and different kind of structures of investing. So it's interesting that 4 out of the 5 people on this panel are generalist healthcare investors. There's only one specialist longevity tech fund, really. Do you think we're kind of at the point where we're ready, we're turning a corner, and they're actually going to be, from what you're seeing, are there going to be more and more longevity focused funds specifically targeting that area?
I think this is an incredible question. Speaking just purely from a European perspective, last year we've seen a lot of established technology funds and healthcare funds making a leap and backing several companies in this space. So clearly it shows, first of all, the appetite, the fact that we're heading towards a point where they're very comfortable with the timeline, or they have identified opportunities that meet the standard venture capital fund life cycle. The natural step afterwards is to create a lot more funds within those organizations, even speculatively, to back this vertical that is emerging. So I think that we are approaching that inflection where it's becoming the top of the agenda. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to become from very fringe to potentially some of the main street funds like Random, Draper, Mercia has now a lot more focus. We've seen a lot of them looking at this space very seriously. So we need a few companies to take off and have great performance before some of these great organizations, they can position very specialized funds.
Great.
Yeah, I would second that, because you can really see that in the last 3 to 4 years, it's come more and more into the mainstream of investing, and traditional healthcare investment funds who would have never thought about investing longevity related projects 5 or 10 years ago are now doing investments in the space, because it's not just become more popular, but it's also become much more solid on the scientific part. So it's more and more scientifically sound, so that there are really also clinically approved or clinically relevant approaches that people can really take a serious due diligence in the science and then make an investment decision. So I'm following the field now for almost 15 years. And about 10 years ago, when you went to a longevity themed conference, you were basically labeled like kind of a fringe freak. So what are you doing? That's crazy. At that point in time, I was one of the only VC investors attending these types of conferences just to have a look what's happening there. And now if you go to a longevity conference, we have a very popular one in Berlin these days, which is called the Undoing Aging, which has been happening in Berlin for 5 years now. And you could really see how more and more mainstream people were attending this conference. And you can also find more and more mainstream biotech companies attending these meetings, because they are really taking a serious interest in there. And I think you will see a lot more, maybe not longevity themed funds, but more and more traditional investors adding portfolio companies in the space to their portfolio, which would also like mix the expectation of their LPs, because LPs usually like to see a balanced portfolio. So you take different bets on different topics, but I think it's definitely going in that direction.
Mm.
Jonathan, there were two specific questions in the chat, one about prevention, and another about what kind of LPs each of us has. And in my case, it's traditional. It's 10-year fund, two extensions to 12 years, and expectation of exits within the 10-year time frame. So that's the answer to the first question. I think the prevention one is very interesting and pertinent, because there are two things that I see. I see the people who want to reverse what has happened and people who want to prevent it happening in the first place. And there are two valid sets of interventions. The biggest problem in the US I see with prevention is who's going to pay for it, because the US reimbursement system isn't very well set up for screening and prevention. And a lot of that is now falling on the consumer, which makes sense if the payments aren't big. So that's where digital has been coming in with a lot of monitoring and prevention. And so there are many aspects, I think, to this space. Another question you asked about specialists and generalists. I think there's a trend towards specialist funds today. There are cancer-focused funds, for rare disease-focused funds. So there is a focus, this deep focus is a trend I'm seeing. And in a lot of ways, I think it's just how you frame it. Because if you look at cancer prevention as longevity versus cancer prevention in terms of cancer monitoring, it's the same thing, but you're putting a different frame on the question. So I think that some of it is framing and rather than substantive difference.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, let's put that question to Peter, who is manager of a specialist fund. So how do you view a cancer therapy in the context of a longevity fund? Is that longevity tech?
Yeah, so I would say yes. By the way, we are not yet invested in cancer-specific startup, but we are talking with two of them, and I will explain why. But let me frame this, let's say, the prevention question in a different way. So if you look at the current healthcare,
it just occurs to me, I don't think the audience can actually see the question, so I'm going to read the question out first, and then you can come to it. So it's a question from Oscar Jung. Would love to hear your opinion on prevention focused on consumers. There are many products and solutions to diseases, yet fewer towards proactive prevention and lifespan. Are these interesting investment opportunities?
Yeah, exactly. They are, because as I mentioned, the current system is most, we call it the healthcare, it's actually the sick care. Right, so we right now in the past we take mostly about the sickness and illness and whatever is related. Even the prevention was more like how to early diagnose some, let's say, the sickness. And where we are moving with this so-called longevity is basically the real health care. So taking care about our health. So if we take care about our health, we naturally get the healthy longevity. That makes sense. So the prevention is the natural part of that path, of that, let's say, the upgrade. This is maybe even the answer to the question how longevity stay as a new field, a new investment field. I understand that really this is the real healthcare. So it's more like a more holistic approach to healthcare. So it's actually covering everything else below. And then we can find what makes, let's say, sense, how we can specialize some investment vehicles. So someone could be very specialized on, let's say, the early diagnostics And for example, the cancer is a clear example where even if you have a very healthy lifestyle, so you still have some chance to get cancer. So it's a natural part of everyone's healthy longevity strategy. But what do you need? You need much more early diagnostic, and you need some prevention technologies for cancer. But there's, of course, some other prevention approaches which are more holistic. So it includes, as I mentioned, lifestyle enhancements, and even the psychology support or mental support. This is all part of the healthcare. So that's my point of view.
Great, thanks. So thinking about the longevity space and trying to break it down into sub-segments, which I know is a very difficult thing to do, I think that it'd be interesting to know from each of you, from the way that you invest or your investment mandates, whether there are any specific sub-segments or themes within longevity that you're particularly focused on at the moment, where you think there's a particularly good risk return ratio, or it can fit within the return can fit within the time horizons of your LPs and your funds. So I'm going to go to Anula on that.
So I'm seeing it in combining digital health and the consumer awareness and activity. So if one were to parse the universe for women and look at monitoring across their lifespan, I think starting with sort of say egg freezing, which is part of longevity for women, because ovarian aging is something that happens pretty early. So if I look at that, that's part of it. But I think there is a view among several venture capitalists, and we are discussing this idea of putting the connected devices that are proliferating all the time and trying to see if women can be monitored and monitoring themselves for ovarian cancer. It's a stealth disease. It's very hard to detect, and much of society doesn't want to pay for the screening. It's the same way with mammograms. Are there these female cancers that can be detected in the same way and managed? Then there is the fertility aspect and monitoring one's fertility. And then there is menopause and monitoring pre-menopause and intervening before one is full-blown in hot flashes. And then there is incontinence and various other areas. So there is a interesting movement around managing the life cycle of an individual and using these digital technologies and putting more control or responsibility in the hands of the consumer, using these various sensors and digital aspects. I think that is something that is very exciting and interesting to me.
Thanks. Flavia?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think Anula, very, very strongly agree that digital health and the mechanism, even beyond women health, has a lot of potential, and it has a very, sound commercial strategy to it. The fact that you can have a go-to-market approach that is slightly different than for biopharma companies addressing this space. I would say that for me, I think there is another space that is definitely going to be proven, and we're going to see a lot of growth, and that is this personalized medicine. Perhaps I'm just going to kind of take a step back. I'm thinking about technology platforms that enable through different indicators for different conditions to calibrate the dosage, calibrate the types of drugs. And we've seen some actually in women health. I'm working with a couple of companies in that space in the UK. And I think that that's actually something that can go very quickly to the market we know that every woman will use quite a number of different solutions like contraception, but it's often very late in your life that you will find the right approach. So I think personalized medicine, this is just one case study, but across the board has an ability to make a very, very fast leap forward and prove that it can be scaled globally. I find that is a space where I'm paying a lot of attention. One, because it doesn't require regulatory approvals. Most of the drugs will have already had all the clearance to be in a market. And it's this kind of recalibration between clinicians, patients, consultants of various different sorts, and of course, lifestyle.
Great, thanks. Peter, yeah.
Yeah, so what I see as a trend, and it's rooted in the science and our understanding of the aging, is that as we go for more and more personalized approaches and therapies, so we will definitely require real-time monitoring, real-time sensors, real-time diagnostics, and real-time evaluation. So maybe that sounds strange for someone, but actually the human biology is extremely dynamic system, which is changing in every minute or every day. So in order to precisely know what the kind of intervention or action or even whatever you want to do is on the right path to your health, so you will need this kind of technologies. So we are not there yet. So there's just a few real time or be very expensive or not variable, but we definitely will need something like this. And in this relation, I would say that this is a message for entrepreneurs, for early entrepreneurs planning some products. So they need to think about the future needs, not about the current needs, because if they ask the consumers right now why would like to wear something for online monitoring right now, because they don't know exactly. But in the period of, let's say, 3 years or 4 years or maybe 5 years, which is basically the when they need to forecast their revenues and their products, so that the situation will be completely different. So entrepreneurs need to think in advance ahead of the market, especially in the longevity and health field.
Yeah, I think what everybody said now, that basically the main focus of our fund as well. So the combination of digital health, machine learning, and different sensors. Just to give you an example from our current portfolio, one of our portfolio companies developed a sensor that's not on the body, but in the body. It's in the eye, and it's measuring the intraocular eye pressure directly in the eye. So you don't have to go to your ophthalmologist every 3 months to see if your glaucoma is progressing or not. You can basically do it by sweeping a reader just in front of your eyes, and you get your intraocular pressure. And that's the best way to manage like chronic diseases, because you're always aware if your condition is improving, it's worsening, if the drugs you take work, and you can prevent the disease from becoming more serious. And that's technology that's already out there. That's CE marked already. So you can basically implant that sensor if you find your ophthalmologist, and you get your health insurance company to reimburse it. These kinds of preventative technologies, monitoring of chronic diseases coupled with machine learning can also help you not just to monitor a disease, but also to predict in combination with machine learning if there will be any future adverse events, for example, in diabetes monitoring. So I think that's one of the sweet spots that we are currently looking at.
I think in that context, one of the things that I'm grappling with is how to integrate all these sensors, because there's now a proliferation of sensors, and some of them are used simultaneously, but for the user, it's complicated because there are so many apps and so many different sensors. And I think one of the interesting areas for me that I've been thinking about is how can we integrate these into a product for consumer to use, where they can use these under one umbrella rather than having to coordinate themselves with all these different sensors, and then how they can get an integrated picture rather than the silos presented by the different sensors.
Interesting. That's great. And just to kind of build on some of the themes in there, but switch the conversation a little bit to thinking about fund structures and the types of investors who are investing in the space. So Petr, you talked about, you know, entrepreneurs needing to think 3 to 5 years out. There was some discussion at the beginning of the conversation about how, you know, 10 to 15 years ago, the longevity field was pioneered by ultra high net worth investors who perhaps were, you know, investing because they themselves wanted to live longer. And we're seeing that change, absolutely. But it still seems to me, and I'd like to hear the panel's view on this, that the time scale for investment in longevity space is perhaps slightly longer than the classic 10-year venture capital funds. You know, if Peter's talking about building what people need 5 years from now, that seems like a long time before going to market. And obviously traditional venture capital funds want to invest in businesses that are at or very close to market. So what's the panel's view on that? And I'm going to come first to Flavia on that point.
Thank you, Jonathan. Obviously, I think here is where maybe I have a diverging opinion. I think the traditional VC structure that we all familiar with, GPLP, that has maybe 10 years, maybe a few more, definitely have the power to catalyze this space, because they will be searching for opportunities and for companies that, as you said, are very close to market or at market, and they will be able to push and show some of those great successes. Which probably will create a whole new generation of funds that is going to be focused on this space a lot more, with a lot more capital. I think that for those therapies and for those new drugs that need to go through a sort of 10-year life cycle, potentially the standard VC structure does not work. And I think that this is where we see quite a lot of university spin-out funds. We see some of the corporate funds potentially positioning themselves and being able to do this type of investments. And of course, the life sciences funds that have slightly longer life cycles beyond the 10-year mark, potentially up to 20. So I think that naturally those type of companies and of therapies that will come to the market will probably be best fitted for the life sciences funds now, until we are going to get a lot more specialized longevity funds with slightly different life cycles to account for the fact that some of those technologies need to be incubated for a lot longer.
Would anyone else like to come in on that?
I would say alternatively, drug development, which is very common in traditional funds, the investors don't expect the product to be commercialized. They expect it to be acquired by someone else who's then going to take it and commercialize it. So for me, it depends on what the exit point for an investor is. If the exit point is commercialization, yes, these longevity interventions will take longer. However, if the exit point is a strategic investor coming in, or a pharma company or somebody like that coming in and buying an asset that is quite distant from commercialization, but the LPs get their exit, then that would work. So it depends on how the exit ecosystem works out in this space and whether commercialization is the desired endpoint for it.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, because your traditional biotech VC is also investing in drug development. And if you have like longevity-based scenes that are targeting a specific druggable target, like for instance, senolytics, and you can prove in clinical trials that you reach clinical endpoints in a specific disease, then the pharma industry might very well be interested in acquiring such companies. I think there are different topics in the field, like if you talk epigenetic reprogramming, which is a pretty experimental approach and you don't have any clue if it will work out in the clinic at all, then that's basically something where a traditional VC might shy away at this point in time.
Maybe I would add regarding the specifically the strategy for our fund, we are early stage focused, so we have a very short-term strategies, actually 5 years only, which could sound interesting in this context, but it makes actually sense because, for example, a couple of our companies, portfolio companies, are already on the market. So there are these information platforms or diagnostic companies. And there is another one having IPO in July this year. Even they have no full product yet. So there are a couple of options how you can expect the exit even within the shorter period. And we are specialized in these early stages, so we definitely expect to have some follow-up funds, follow-on vehicles, where this strategy will be, of course, longer and will support companies during these A, B, or C development stages.
Okay, great, thank you. And in thinking about the types of investors who are investing in this space, we've said we've seen the investor groups change. We've seen it move from high net worth into funds, and as many of us are fund managers, what types of LPs should we be trying to attract to the space, and on what basis should we be attracting them to the space? I think that there was a question here from Eric Leary. Sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. What are the expectations of the LPs for your funds? Is it mostly based on financial returns, or do they expect other benefits? So I think it's a really key question. It's to a certain extent, it's our job both to invest in good companies, but also to attract more capital to the space. So who should we be looking to attract, and how, and on what basis? So I'm going to go to Joachim with that question.
Yeah, I think one of the most likely groups of investors that are interested in that field currently are high net worth individuals or family offices. So we've seen a lot of interest from different family offices in the space. And usually it's a combination of mission-driven and financial return. So the classical, institutional investors who are purely interested in financial returns, they might not be the ideal investors in this point if you have a longevity theme-based fund. So I would target, if I would raise a longevity-based fund, I would target family offices as my primary target group.
Petr?
Yeah, I would confirm that. So high net worth individuals and family offices, because they have more, let's say, personal understanding of that field. And institutional investors, even they could have a personal understanding, they still have some bureaucracy burden to enter this field. So it's too early for them, at least, let's say this and next year. Maybe it will change sometime, but right now I would confirm what Joachim said.
And Flavia, do you have the similar view to that? I mean, your setup's a little bit different at Silicon Valley Bank.
I think that what I'm seeing is definitely quite a group of different types of LPs and of funds that have different groups of LPs in the space. So I think that very early on, at least in the UK and Europe, we see a lot of the sort of university established funds like UCL, Cambridge, Oxford have established funds to support that type of innovation. But you can see investments last year from Roche and GSK and quite a number of corporates deploying capital in this space. So very early on, which is quite unusual as well. you would expect them to come a lot later in the cycle, which makes me think that potentially this is the sort of inflection point where as it gets into the mainstream, we're going to see a lot different sources of capital, and maybe some of the more established LPs in Europe, like EIF, the European Investment Fund, British Business Bank here in the UK, looking at longevity through the impact lenses. They might be willing to back funds of that nature. So definitely you could see that happening in the space.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Anula, go.
Oh, I just want to echo Flavia said impact. I think that is an area that will play a big role. Look at models like the Dementia Discovery Fund, for example, which is looking at doing fundamental work and creating or remedying a field, that has been mired in failures. And then I think also impact investors are interested in creating and boosting fields. So that's where I would go to look for support for this area.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, because there's a tendency maybe to see longevity as as potentially a problem and something that we've got to overcome, but there's also a huge opportunity in it of healthy aging and more productive life. And if should we be as fund managers and as investors, should we be trying to attract more money from more public money, or more money from insurance companies and pension funds who have a strategic imperative to put money into this space? Is that possible to do, or are there barriers to doing that?
I would say the converse, which is pension funds probably aren't a good investor in this space, or people who need liquidity fairly quickly. And I think those who can take a longer view. So I think that is what we're all saying. And there are different types of investors who have the ability to take a longer view. I think insurance is very interesting. Currently they aren't, at least in the US, they aren't taking that sort of fundamental views like that. This is would be a fundamental long-term investment. And I think that would be very interesting if that can come to.
Okay, great. So we've just got about 2 minutes left. This has been a really interesting conversation. If anybody has any other questions, please submit them into the chat now. I'm just going to pick up a couple that we haven't touched on. A question from John Hodgson: what is the obverse of the longevity dividend? Which broad categories of current investment will fade away as longevity becomes a focus? Does anybody have a view on that, on which areas of current VC investment are going to fall away? Tough question to answer, I think. Okay, Petr?
Maybe that simply and very quickly, we can broaden the longevity category to not just the internal body environment, but the external environment. So if you count all the environment we live in, so we can call it longevity living. So you can then count numerous technologies like green technologies and plastic reduction and what else, which are kind of eliminating some other technologies. So this is maybe partial answer to which field can disappear, because this is a part of all of these movements, transitional movements in the world.
Yeah, okay. And it goes even broader than that, right? Because, we could be talking about other facets of people, of individuals living longer, like, requirement for retraining, all sorts of areas about lifestyle and which are not health related. So I guess the answer is that, that longevity, or people living longer, will spawn a multitude of different industries and investment opportunities. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, everybody, for your participation. I hope this was interesting for the audience, and I'm going to hand back to Josh.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. Flavia, did you have something you wanted to add just there? I saw a hand shoot up. No, oh, just a thumbs up. Fantastic. Well, yeah, I mean, so much to go into there, and the questions were flowing in, so apologies if we didn't get to your question. Hopefully the panel will be able to log into the Swapcar platform, maybe answer some over the chat they didn't get to. And indeed, I hope that everyone can keep the conversation going in that live discussion, and indeed with the one-to-one partnering that'll be open all week. Again, visiting the rest of the website, checking out the showcases and poster zones and all the content that's gone across. This session will be immediately available on demand, so if you did miss it first time round, you can go back and see any sessions you did miss. A huge thank you to all of our panel, to Jonathan, to Anula, to Flavia, to Joachim and Petr. We are off on this track now for a short period, but for those who are interested specifically in investing in longevity biotech and geroscience, don't miss our panel in the other track later on today, starting at 7 o'clock Central European time, 6 o'clock here in the UK, or 1 o'clock Eastern. A number of great speakers on there, and more specifically focused on the sort of longevity biotech investment space. But for now, thank you all for joining us. Please do keep the conversation going. Thanks to all of our panel, and see you soon.